next week. Last week, I left here after Christmas. We had the Christmas celebration, and you get visitors and all that come in, and we ended the book of Ruth. And I left there, got in the car, and God was just like, Dave, we're not done yet. I felt like it was necessary that we go back to the book of Ruth. And if you've been here the last few weeks, we have spent 4 weeks going through the book of Ruth, word by word, verse by verse, going right through the book of Ruth, pulling out, gleaning from this great book, this great picture of who God is. We ended last week by talking about this baby that was the picture of redemption for Ruth, a Moabite woman who was a pagan, a false God worshiper who God redeemed through this man Boaz and ultimately found it in the baby. And we talked about how Christ is our redemption. But the story is much bigger than just that. And I thought we've been very technical going throughout this book, and I thought it would be good to come back and look at it from a very, very practical, applicable picture that you and I can take with us this morning. As we've journeyed through this book, we've seen 4 threads, and I've alliterated them for you. And the reason I did that is because it sounds very smart to do that. That was a joke. First of all, in the chapter 1, we saw God's promises, right? In this book of Ruth, we saw that this woman, Naomi, lost her husband and 2 sons after they left Bethlehem and went to Moab because there was a famine in Bethlehem. While there, she loses everything. Her family is gone. She's left with 2 daughters-in-laws who are Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. Yet at the end of that, we see Naomi renaming herself, which Naomi means sweet, but she renames herself bitter. She's bitter. In the midst of that chapter, we still see the hand of God, the promises of God, that God makes promises and that God keeps his promises. We then came to chapter 2, and we saw that God is provident. God is a promise-keeping God, but also God is provident over the things of the earth. We saw in chapter 2 that over and over again it says that Ruth showed up at the field, and it just so happened that she showed up in the field where Boaz was. And we talked about how with God there is no happenstance. That with God, he is provident over the things of our life. He is directing the things of our lives. And while it may seem from an earthly perspective that it is our doing or our causing, it is God behind the scenes working out his great grand plan of glory in the midst of our lives. And so we saw chapter 2 that God is at work. And we said that there's this paradox in life where it seems like we're in control, but really God is in control and God is at work. And so sometimes even the best of life is dripping with the worst of life. We then looked at chapter 3, and we saw God's provision. That there was a man in this field who owned this field named Boaz who happened to be related to Naomi. And we saw that he was called the kinsman redeemer. That he was able to redeem, but the question was he willing? Remember, they came up with an elaborate plan to go, and Ruth covered herself at the feet of Boaz. And if you remember the story, Boaz at the end says, listen, the Lord is with you. I will redeem you, but there is another one who is closer in relation to you. And remember at the end of chapter 3, we know that God has provided. The question is, how is he going to do it? This man was able and willing, but was the other man going to take her? We come to chapter 4. Last week we looked at chapter 4, and we saw that God had a purpose. And that purpose was that the name of Ruth and the name of Boaz would be written in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. That through their child there was redemption and that God restored all that he had done. Now listen, it would be very easy for us when we read these type of stories to love chapter 4 but forget that chapter 1, 2, and 3 get us to chapter 4. You can't have chapter 4, God's purpose revealed living, without chapter 1, 2, and 3, God's difficulty. Chapter 4 happens as a package deal with chapters 1, 2, and 3. And so this morning, I thought it would be neat to pull back the curtain and look a little bit deeper at this book from a different perspective, because there's something happening behind the scene here that we could just easily miss. Yesterday, obviously, we had Christmas, and one of the things that the boys had gotten for Christmas were some games, video games. You gotta play with video games, and so we have certain rules on when they can play and not. But anyway, yesterday morning, we had gotten up, and it was a great kind of lazy day. It had been a busy week kind of thing, and just getting up and being able to play and have a good time. But my wife made a statement. Now, I'm a competitor at heart. And my wife challenged me in this game that I think she really wanted, that she got for the boys, but it was for herself. And it was the Disney dancing game. And she's like, hey, babe, you want to come down and challenge me at Disney dancing? At first, I'm like, no way. I'm a sports war kind of guy. I'm not going to go down and do any dance moves with you. I mean, I live in a house with guys. There's no way this is going to happen. She knew how to push my buttons. And so we went to the basement. We turned it on. All four of our boys are sitting there observing this. And so she picks the song, right? And the song happens to be a High School Musical song, of all things. Now, you can picture me. I know some of you know. We end up dancing this High School Musical thing. And you know who won? A little competition? That's right. I'm from the west end of Hagerstown, folks. We got rhythm in the west end, all right? We got rhythm in the west side of Hagerstown. And so she didn't know that. Like, she thought, so I'm moving, grooving with the beat, and raising, when it's go like that, like whatever, do whatever. I'm doing it all, going around. I'm even adding extra moves in there because that's what we do, right? And in the end, this is no lie, in the end, this little bar raises to tell you your score. And at the beginning, when we ended it, her score was higher than mine. Now follow. The boys are watching this, she's cheering. Well, what they didn't put in was a score when you had moves in order. And so there was a bonus score if you had so many moves that you got in the same row, in an order. And all of a sudden, the scores go, bloop, and my score was much higher than hers. And I look over and go, in your face, see ya. All right. Now, if I'm being real honest, she said, well, can we try it again? And I did, and she won the second one to a different song. But watch out, Zac Efron. I'm in. I am a Disney dancer. Now, I'm going somewhere with this, okay? Follow. You don't have to leave yet. I'm going to go somewhere with this. So here we are, and afterwards, my youngest son comes up to me, and he says, Dad, that really wasn't that fair. And I said, well, why, son? Why wasn't it fair? He said, because you probably played this game when you were younger, and Mom didn't. And you ever have those moments where you just think, how did I get here? I had that moment yesterday morning because when my son said that, it hit me that we didn't have video games when I was a kid. That if someone had an Atari, they were rich. I remember when the Nintendo came out, and I saved up, every penny I could find to get a Nintendo and to play, remember Mario Brothers and stuff? And I remember when those things came out, and I was thinking, wait, that's not true, son. I didn't have a cell phone. It hit me how did I get here, right? In fact, I remember my wife, when she drove there on Washington Wild, she had one of those car phones, those things that were this big, and when you pick it up, you're like, hello. And I thought it was the coolest thing. I thought she was rich. It was one of the reasons I married her, then I found out. But she had this car phone, and I'm like, man, only cool people have car phones, because I certainly didn't have a car phone, right? And so it hit me how did I get here? And you ever have those moments where you're like, I'm sitting here in 2012. How did I get in this room playing Disney dance game? How did I get here? And it overwhelmed me yesterday. And this is exactly what we're seeing in the story of Ruth. How did they get here? Follow me. I realize how Naomi got her situation, right? Naomi moves to Moab to escape famine. Her husband and sons die. I get why she's bitter at the end of chapter 1. I get Ruth's situation. Here's Ruth, a Moabite woman. She can go back home, but she knows there's something about this God that Naomi serves, and so she goes back to Bethlehem with Naomi, and she goes back there, and you know what happens, right? All of a sudden, she finds out there's a Redeemer, and there's a man who loves her and wants her, and I get why she responds the way she does by faith. That makes sense to me. But I don't get how Boaz was willing to allow God to lead him to marry this woman. Do you remember when the other Redeemer in chapter 4 comes on the scene? Do you remember what he says? Boaz says to the other Redeemer, you're closer in relation. You can take the land, Naomi's husband's land. You have to, but if you take the land, you got to take Ruth with it. And remember what he says? He says, no deal. No, thank you. What made Boaz willing to walk that road? What made Boaz willing to redeem? What made Boaz willing? Now, we saw in chapter 2 that he was a worthy man. We saw in chapter 2 he was a wealthy man. We saw in chapter 2 that God was at work in his life. Remember he shows up at the job site saying, may the Lord bless you. What boss does that? But what made him the man that he was? Well, the answer is found in the genealogy that we so quickly look over. Take a look here. Ruth chapter 4. And we're going to start in verse 18. Now, we're going to look a little bit deeper into this genealogy because the writer of Ruth, many believe is Samuel, is not giving us all the details. But here's what it says. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. By the way, Nahshon was a prince of the people of Judah. And so he was one that built up Judah, the tribe of Judah. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Remember we talked about that baby? The servant who worships is that name. Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. Nothing significant there. We see these names and we just jump right over them, right? When we get to Leviticus and when we get to the genealogies, we go, and we skip right by them. But then we get to Matthew chapter 1. Matthew chapter 1, Jesus' genealogy. Listen to what it says. It takes the genealogy found in Ruth and it enhances it a little bit for us to give us greater insight. Take a look. Matthew chapter 1. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by who? Whoa. Do you see what just happened? Boaz's mother was Rahab. Now, there are some scholars that will say here this was his grandmother. They skipped a generation. Folks, it doesn't matter if it's grandmother or mom. He was a child of Rahab. Do you know who I'm talking about, Rahab? Rahab, who is called all throughout the scripture the harlot, found in Joshua chapter 2. Let's go back there. Joshua chapter 2. Now, here's what's happened. The book of Ruth has a backstory. And this backstory, not found in Ruth, is all about Boaz. And is founded in the story of Rahab. Rahab the harlot, who was a Canaanite pagan worshiper, who was not an Israelite, who found herself in a circumstance where God confronted her and changed her life. Now, I want us to see this story. And here's what we're going to do this morning. I'm going to be very upfront with you. We're going to be very practical. And I thought about this. What would Rahab have said to her son about her story? Like, I don't know about you. My mom, and I don't know why moms do this. Mom have these ways of saying lines that just make you think, and you're like, where did that come from? What does that even mean? Like, my mom used to say to me when we would get ready to go somewhere, my mom would say, hey, Dave, come on, we got to go. Take your time, but hurry up a little bit. What? What in the world does that mean? Take your time? I mean, which one do you want me to do? But she had this meaning, and she would say these lines. I don't know why moms do that, but moms have these little lines they just say, and you're like, Mom, that doesn't even make sense. But yet it does make sense. Like, and then you become a parent, and you understand what it means, and then you're like, wow, that was really smart. I couldn't believe my mom said that. That was, and moms have this way. I wonder what Rahab would have said to her son Boaz to make him the man that he was. What made Salmon and Rahab teach their son this way? Now, I want to look at this from that perspective. What would Rahab have said to her son? Take a look at the story. Joshua chapter 2. And Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, go view the land, especially Jericho. Let me explain what's happening. The people of Israel are at the edge of the Jordan River, about ready to enter the promised land. They're about ready to go across and take of the land that God had promised them. Here's the problem. This is a new generation. If you remember, the generation that came out of Egypt began wandering in the wilderness, and they spent 40-some years in the wilderness. 40 years in the wilderness for judgment, but even more when you look at their journeys. 40-some years they're in the wilderness. And so God, while there, they go in to spy the land. God sends 10 spies into the land. 2 of them come back with good reports. 9 of them come back and say, hey, we can't do it. They're big. They got big armies. And so God says, all right, you don't believe me, you don't trust me? I'm going to start over. I'm going to make a new generation except for 2 people. I'm going to allow 2 people who came out of Egypt enter the promised land. Anybody remember who those 2 people are? Joshua and Caleb. I love the name Caleb. We named one of our sons Caleb. It means attack. Joshua came back and said, we can go. Let's attack. It's ironic because my son kind of fits that. He's a go-getter. Attack. Caleb. And so he's a go-getter. That's Caleb. Joshua and Caleb were the only ones allowed to enter the land. They were the only ones allowed to go in from Egypt. There had been a new generation that had risen up. And so here, they're getting ready to go into the land, and Joshua sends in, and I just find it ironic how many spies he sends into the land. How many? 2. Before they sent 10, committees don't work. We're sending 2, and that's all we need. And so he sends 2. I just think it's kind of funny that it was 2 that came back and said we can take it. So he says, I'm only going to send 2 in. Take a look at what happens. And they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. And it was told to the king of Jericho, behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land. Then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, true, the men came to me, but I do not know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out. I don't know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax that she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued after them on the way to Jordan as far as the fords, and the gate was shut as soon as the pursuers had gone out. Interesting. These spies come to a house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab. Now, in Hebrew, the name Rahab comes from 2 words together. The name Ra, which is the name of a false god. The name Ra means evil, false god, Ra. And Chab, put them together, and the word actually means loose. Now, for the sake of the kids here, I don't have to explain why she would be named loose, do I? She was a prostitute. Imagine. Now, I know my thoughts are, because I think about these things, why did they go to the house of a prostitute? Why did the spies, the people of God, go there? Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? When people would be traveling into the city, Jericho was a huge city. In fact, the walls, they say, of the city stood 40 to 50 feet high and were so thick that you could drive 3 chariots on top all the way around. They were huge. And so here they are, these spies coming to land, and where are you going to go to spy to land where no one would expect you to be and where everybody comes and goes? In their culture, because it was a pagan culture, you go to the house of a harlot. In fact, sex was a way they worshiped God in Jericho. So, no one would look for you in the house of a prostitute. Now, we know it's innocent. As we look at the story, it's innocent. They had a plan, but they went to the place that was safe. As we find out later on, Rahab's house was in the wall, had a window outside the wall. She probably maybe even had a little, one of those neon signs outside her wall saying, men, come in, men, come in, right? She was welcoming them. She was looking for the young men coming into the city, traveling. And here these 2 men ended up in her house. It says the king ended up coming by. The king of Jericho comes by saying, we've heard that there are spies and that they come to this house. They come to your house, Rahab. And Rahab says, no. They did come, but they've left. She lies to them. Now, I know we can debate, was her lie good or not? Remember, this is CIA operative stuff here we're reading, okay? This is FBI. This is JBI, Jericho Bureau of Investigation. And they're trying to figure this out. So this is behind the scenes. So we can question whether her lie was okay or not. God was okay with it. The point is, she clearly didn't have a good moral compass. So to hold her accountable for the lie would be to minimize the fact that she was a harlot. So let's not even talk about that. The fact is, she told them, no, they've gone out. She hid them in the stalks of flax. Flax was a type of linen. It was probably dry season, and she would have put them on top of her roof. That was probably the top of the tower, a top of the wall, and she would lay them up there to dry. It's kind of the stalks of flax would have been made to be made clothing or material, and so she hid them under there, and in order to hide them from the king. Now, follow. At this point, we don't know. I wonder if she's telling the story to her son Boaz, if she's maybe making some statements. And I'm just going to make some practical statements coming back to us. Maybe she would have said to her son, you know why I tell you that part of the story? Isn't it because I'm proud of it, but because I want you to remember where you come from. Do you know what's interesting about Rahab? All throughout the Bible, whenever Rahab is mentioned, there's always a little adjective that comes along with it. Rahab the harlot, everywhere. In fact, 5 times in the New Testament, her name is mentioned in a paragraph form. It always says Rahab the harlot. Now, you might ask, why in the world, knowing this story, knowing what God is going to do, why does God label her that way? Well, I think, and by the way, I have this picture that one day we're going to get into heaven, and my view of heaven is this. I don't think we're just going to know everybody when we get up there. I think part of heaven is going to be getting to know people for eternity, that we're going to be introducing ourselves, because there's nothing perfect about knowing everybody. The perfection is getting to know people. That's just my perspective. The Bible doesn't speak for or against that. If you want to debate that later, that's fine. I'll let you win. It doesn't matter to me. But I think part of the fun is going to be getting to know millions and millions of people for eternity. Hey, what's your name? So you can imagine we walk up to Rahab, and we say, hey, so, ma'am, what's your name? And she says, it's Rahab. And we go, Rahab? You're Rahab the harlot. And I can just picture her going, can we give me another name, please? God did a work in my life, and I was no longer a harlot anymore. Remember, I'm in the genealogy of Jesus. Why does God leave the name harlot in there? Listen, I believe God is saying to us and reminding us, here is a woman. Think about this. Here's a woman. How many hearts has she broken? How many homes did she destroy? How many families have been torn apart because of her actions? How many marriages have been ruined? And here is God reminding us that God wants us to know that our past doesn't have to control the future. The reason why I believe God always labels her as Rahab the harlot is to say, look what I did with her. Folks, it is very important to you and I, when we fall in line with the sovereignty of God, when we see that God is in control of all things, to remember where we've come from. I believe Boaz, the reason why he was a righteous man with Ruth is because he remembered the story of his mother. That God did not allow her past to determine who she was going to be. That God saw the potential of his love transforming her and his grace transforming her. Folks, you know why most of us are kind of lazy in our faith, why most of us kind of sit on the sidelines, and we're just kind of like, why many of us are in distress and overwhelmed with things? Because we forget where we've come from. Now, I don't know about you. My testimony is I was 8 years old when I put my faith in Christ, so I don't have this type of testimony that says, well, before salvation, I was drinking 50 beers a day, and before salvation, I killed a guy. Even though I'm a pink ninja, I killed a guy. And before salvation, I was sleeping around and all this stuff. I mean, 8 years old, I wasn't doing much of that. In fact, for my story is, after I accepted Christ, my life got a little harder. My dad died and all this stuff. My life got harder after I accepted Christ. But listen, when God saved me, he didn't just save me from what I was, he saved me from the potential of what I could be. Did you follow? It's not just of what I was sinfully, it was a potential that I had to ruin my life in sin. God died not only for who I was, but who I could have been without him. That's the beauty of the gospel. So I remember when I think about my life, when things aren't going well in my life, when things aren't matching up sometimes, and I wonder, God, what are you doing? I come back to remember who I would be without him. And it sets everything aligned when I remember who I would be without him, or who I was without him. I remember where I came from. And God reminds me, I did the work in you. I did the work in you. That was me, as we're going to see in the story. This is God's work. Take a look at what else happens here, right? So she maybe says to her son, remember where you have come from. By the way, do not be a spiritual scab picker. So many Christians continually pick the same scabs over and over and over again and do not understand the healing that God brings to them over their sin, over their struggles, over their strife. That God is able to bring healing. When I say that, I'm not talking about like physically we remember. Physically we have scars. Physically that happens. But we should not be picking scabs. We should be living life in Christ. Some of you spend too much time picking the scab and trying to heal the same wound that healed before, instead of living our life to the glory of God. Now, the story goes on, verse 8. Before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea before you came out of Egypt. Before you when you came out of Egypt. And what you did to the kings of the Amorites were on the other side of the Jordan, who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man. You know what she just does? She just responds with 40 years of Israel's history. She says, hey, You know what? We've heard about you. 40 years ago when the Red Sea parted, I heard about that. We know who your God is. We know what he's done. We know that when you came on the other side of the Jordan, you destroyed the Amalekites. We know about that. We knew that God has delivered you. Now notice what she says in response. Notice, this is powerful. Notice her response, verse 11. Our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, by the way, interesting, she uses the name Yahweh, the covenant name of God to the people of Israel. For Yahweh your God, the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. What did she just say? She just confirmed, committed, and said, your God is the real God. Your God is the God of heaven above. Your God is the God of the earth. Your God is it. Now at this point, that's all she knows is she's convinced you got control. Your God is in control. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with me. By the way, there's a great play on words here, and I don't have time to get into it. I love this deep stuff. When you see these type of things like the word Yahweh is a covenant name of God, and then she says deal kindly. It means a covenant kindness with me. It's actually the same word we sang about this morning. Chesed, it's a covenant love, covenant kindness. It is this only a love that God can give. She says, listen, can you deal kindly with me with covenant? As God is a covenant God? It's just beautiful there. It's kind of a play on words. We don't have time to dive in too deeply. She says, now please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with my father's house and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and mother and brothers and sisters and all who belong to them and deliver our lives from death. And the men said, our life for yours, even to death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. Then she let down by a rope through the window, let them down, for her house was built into the city wall, so that she lived in the wall. And she said to them, go into the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you, and hide there 3 days until they come back. Then afterwards you may go your way. Then the men said, we will be guiltless with respect to this oath of yours that you have made us answer. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie a scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and you shall gather into your house your father and mother, brothers and sisters, all of your household. Then if anyone goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood will be on our head, and we shall be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is within this house, his blood shall be on our head. But if you tell this business of ours, then we will be guiltless with respect to your oath that you have made us swear. And she said, according to your words, so be it. Now, so here's the deal. She says, I know who your God is. He is the Lord above the heaven, and he is the Lord of the earth. So here's the deal. I know who he is. Will you make a promise with me? Make a deal with me. And the deal is, as I have been kind to you, will you be kind to me, and will you spare my life and my family's? So they make two conditions in order for this to happen. First, hang a scarlet cord out your window. All right, so maybe she grabs the scarlet cord, right? By the way, prostitutes in their day would have wore really bright colors. That was the way they identified themselves. And they said, listen, hang this out your window, right? And so obviously it was probably much longer than this because it says they climbed down it. But you can imagine 40 feet down, and she hangs this over. Hang a scarlet cord, all right? Red, by the way, it's the word red. In Hebrew, there's another word for red. Scarlet is kind of the old word for red. Hang it down out of your window. Secondly, make sure your family is in the house when we come. If they're not, then their blood's not on our heads. If you're not in the home and that scarlet cord's not there, sorry, you're on your own. This oath is not accomplished. Now, notice she has to believe in the word that they shared. From her perspective, the words they're sharing are the words of God to her to save her, right? And I love verse 21 because it gives us the answer to her response. It is, according to your words, so be it. Here's what we see is Rahab responds with faith. She says, I believe your word. Let it happen. Let it be. It's emphatic in Hebrew. It means let it be. Let it happen. Isn't that what faith is? God, we believe your word. Now let it be in my life. Let it happen. And her response to her faith is the next phrase. And she tied the scarlet cord in the window. What does that tell us? Her faith believed something was going to happen. Now, by the way, this is the connection that's made all throughout the New Testament with Rahab. We're going to look at these verses in a moment. But I want you to consider this. Rahab put her salvation in a scarlet cord. Anybody see a tie to that, to the New Testament and you and I? Isn't our salvation tied to a scarlet cord? Is it not tied to the cord of Jesus' blood? That his blood is sufficient for my sins, that his blood is sufficient to redeem, that his blood is sufficient to forgive? And we hang on to a scarlet cord as well. So here she is on the wall saying, I believe. Now, I know that's a spiritual, this is a physical thing, that's a spiritual take on it. But I believe she would have said to Boaz, her son, she said, son, this is what happened. I put the scarlet cord out there. I didn't know for sure what was going to happen. But I believe faith controls choices. You know, when many of us think of faith, you know what we think of? We think of kind of sitting back and we say, I just believe, right? So when we have an image of faith in our head, we think of like the chair, right? I believe the chair holds me up. What do I have to do to show that? I then sit in the chair. My faith is I'm willing to sit in the chair. The scripture reveals that faith is not just sitting quietly by, that faith actually does something. If you believe something is true, then you live as if it is true, right? If we believe that God is who he claims to be, that God has saved us by his blood, that God did walk out of a grave, then how should our response be? How should faith look? Well, the scripture says it this way. Beautiful passage, James 2. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. And in the same way, was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead. Let me explain this passage. James is writing, and he's using the illustration of Rahab, and he says this. James is writing to say, here's what good faith looks like, and here's what bad faith looks like. Bad faith does nothing. It's just vain belief, right? Like you may be here this morning and say, I believe God exists. James 2:19 says, even the demons believe and tremble. So just believing that Jesus died on the cross doesn't matter. Just believing he rose again doesn't change your life. It is that I'm willing to trust it as I move forward. Remember we said, I move and God does. Faith is that I'm going to move. I am going to produce. So good faith produces works. So here's what Rahab says. Rahab says, as you have spoken the words, so let it be. I so believe it that I'm going to tie the scarlet cord out my window. Why? Because I believe it to be true. Faith produces. You want to know why? You want to know why many of us in our spiritual lives don't see our faith doing anything? It's because we truly don't understand what we believe in. We don't grasp the depth of the God that we believe in, that we trust. We don't really grasp the gospel message, how deep it is. We sang about it this morning. We're just like, oh, Jan, the love of Jesus, great. Thank you for loving me. No. I mean, think about it. If we know it, then what does it mean? When I'm hanging on the thread, I trust God. Right? You ever feel like in life you're just hanging by a thread? I remember one time when I was younger, I was out, one of the most embarrassing moments when I was in school, and I was over at Western Heights Middle School. I was in 6th grade. We were outside for gym, and we were playing baseball, and there's a little fence that goes over to Marshall Street School right beside Western Heights Middle School. And we were playing, I think we were playing kickball right there, and the ball was about ready to go over the fence. And the fence, there's a little mound that goes over, so the fence is kind of sitting down a little bit in the mound. And so if you go up on the mound, you could kind of jump over the fence. And so I was going after a pop fly, and I remember jumping over the fence, and as I jumped, the back of my shorts caught the fence. Here I was in 6th grade, and I'm hanging in my underwear, and I look up, and I'm hanging there on the fence because it's down in a, kind of down a little valley, so the other side goes down, and I'm hanging there, and I look up, and it's literally like a little thread of my pants is hanging, and there's all these, girls and boys, and you're 6th grade, you know how that feels, and I'm hanging there by my pants, and I'm like, I didn't know what to say, I remember going back in, and I don't know why my response is always this way, it seems, but I went back in, my pants are all ripped and everything, I'm hanging there by the thread, I went in and cried. I mean, that's all you do. 6th grade, my life's going to be ruined, everybody's going to make fun of me forever, and I haven't, in fact, I'm the only one bringing this up. I'm not even sure why I'm sharing it, except to say, you know how you feel when you're just hanging by a thread sometimes in life? I just want you to imagine for a moment, right? I mean, it says in Hebrews 11, Rahab, by faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had given a friendly welcome to the spouse. She had faith that God was going to provide what he said he would provide. She had faith. Faith controls choices. I make choices based upon my faith. If I believe God, then even when my life seems to be hanging by the thread, I trust that his word will be fulfilled, that he will keep his promises. And so I respond by faith. I walk, I move, I do. I don't just sit back. My faith is doing something. And I'm saying, God, I'm going to do. I'm going to move, and you're going to do. You're going to accomplish your plan in my life. Rahab here, that's what she did. She said, all right, yeah, so be it, so be it. I'll put the cord out there as a demonstration that I believe your word. I will let you escape down this cord, and I will trust that you will save my life. Now, you know what happens, right? This is powerful. By the way, I just wonder what it was like. If you know the story in chapter 6, right? Most of us know the story because we live in this Christian culture here, right? We all sang as little kids in church, Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, right? And the walls came. Yeah, see, most of us have grown up in this type of culture, right? I imagine, what was she thinking when for 6 days the entire nation of Israel walked around the walls of Jericho and at the end yelled, and on the 7th day they walked around 7 times and then they yelled? I mean, what was she thinking when she was waiting? Maybe she was taking the cord and going, remember me? I mean, we're not given how much time's in between this. Can you imagine how she must have felt? But listen, I believe this with all my heart. God was preparing her for what he had already prepared for her. God was preparing her for the plan he had for her life, to be in the genealogy. He was preparing her to believe and trust that he is sufficient and enough. Now, you know what happens, right? The story goes on in in Joshua 2. It says they departed and went back, did exactly what she said, went back and waited 3 days, went back to Joshua, and they said in verse 24, truly the Lord has given this land into our hands, and all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us. Go over to chapter 6. Here's where the wall comes tumbling down. By the way, this wall, as it comes down, the archaeologists say it comes down leaning on the inside. It crumbles from within, and it leans inside. Archaeologists have demonstrated. Can you imagine? Here she is, a scarlet cord hanging from her window. Faith controls choices. She believed in this God that she had heard about, and she trusted that the words of the spies would come about. And so she hangs the cord. Can you imagine when the walls began to shake? I'm just picturing her tell Boaz the story. And she said, hey, Boaz, I remember when the walls started shaking, they went around 7 times, and they yelled, which, by the way, if you're a military expert in here, I don't think we have any, but if you are, I'd love to talk with you. Try to explain to me why whenever Israel went into battle, they always sent the priests and the Ark of the Covenant first. Kind of weird. Like, I'd pick out the most mightiest of men, but they don't do that. They send the priests first. It'd be like sending me into battle first. You're sending Dave into battle? Why are we doing that? That's kind of the picture of that. Send the pastor into battle first, If he dies, then we'll run. I don't know. It just is kind of funny to me, the way they did military work. They go around the city, they yell, the walls. Can you imagine her telling the story? Boaz, listen, son, I felt the wall shaking, and I wondered, is that scarlet cord going to mean anything? Is it going to hold me? Right? The walls begin to shake, and all of a sudden they come down, and the only section of the wall still standing, it had to be hers. In fact, take a look at chapter 6. I love her name comes up. It says, verse 16, and at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom he sent. Go over to verse 22. The walls come down, but the 2 men who had spied of the land, Joshua said, go into the prostitute's house and bring out from there the woman and all that belonged to her, as you swore to her. So the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and mother and brothers and all who belonged to her. And they brought all her relatives and put them outside the camp of Israel. And they burned the city with fire and everything in it. Only silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and iron they put in the treasury of the house of the Lord. Verse 25, but Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive. And notice, this is powerful. And she lived in Israel to this day, as Joshua is writing, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy at Jericho. Now, Does your brand of faith trust God that much? See, we tend to differentiate our lives to the lives of the characters of Scripture, and we say, God's not breaking down walls like that anymore. But I don't think faith is supposed to be any different than their faith. Like we might not be living in a wall of a pagan nation, but do we trust God in our nation? Do we trust God in our lives? Do we trust God in the moments where it seems like things are crumbling? Are we holding on to the scarlet cord, so to speak, of God's sovereignty and His working on the cross? I wonder if maybe Rahab would have said to Boaz, Boaz, listen, there is no sin, there is no calamity that is beyond the ability of God to reclaim with His goodness for His purpose. Think about this story. God takes a harlot and gives her a family of the people of Israel. God gives her a new reputation. I mean, the woman who was called a harlot is now mentioned in the Hall of Faith, Hebrews 11. A woman who probably had any disease that was offered in Jericho became a mother of kings. Why? Because God is able to reclaim both sin and calamity that happens in our lives for His goodness. Here's what happens. Here's how this looks. By the way, we're not sure what happens to her here. She goes back and lives in Israel. Tradition says, when I say tradition, I mean some scholars say, now this may not be true, but it's kind of conjecture, that Salmon was one of the spies, some believe. And Salmon actually is, in 2 Chronicles, it says that he helped build Judah. That he had, and many believe, by the way, Salmon is the one who built Bethlehem, which means Boaz was of stature and had a lot of land because his dad built Bethlehem. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's an interesting point. What did he see in this woman Rahab? He saw a woman of faith. She was a harlot, and yet he took her as his wife, and she becomes a part of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. By the way, if you ever do a study on the genealogy of Christ, you know what you find? Is God takes weird people and difficult situations and redeems them for Himself, doesn't He? I mean, you and I look at our lives, and we see setback after setback after setback after situation. Listen, but our setbacks are God's setups. We're set back in our life, and God says, no, you know what? That would be a great way for me to work. I'm going to set this up for my glory. See, our setbacks are God's setup, and that's what God is doing in this story, is He is setting up His glory. He's giving her new realities, new relatives, and new reputation. Man, this home wrecker now was a household name because of the work of God that He has done. God's not attracted to our abilities as much as He is not distracted from our disabilities. You might look at your life and you say, God, what in the world are you doing? Listen, God, what are you doing in my life? Do you trust God? That's the story of Ruth and Boaz. That's the story. The story is that Boaz believed that in that woman, Ruth, he saw his mother. He said, God, if you could do that to my mom who was a harlot, then what could you do with a Moabite woman who believes and trusts in you? And he married her and redeemed her, and both of them show up in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Think about that. I want to end with one passage just to bring this together, and I always like to end in the New Testament whenever you look at the Old Testament because it brings us to our lives today. Go over, if you would, to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Why does God do this? It's easy for us to look at our lives and say, well, that's the Bible characters. That's what they do in the Bible. That's not us. Listen, right now in your life, folks, let me just be real raw with you. Again, this is practical. I realize we've been through this book in very great detail. But I want to pause and just bring this back to our lives for a moment. You know, you look at the situation of your life, and the same question that was asked of Rahab is asked of you. Do you believe the words? You find yourself in a financial situation? Are you grabbing the scarlet cord? You find yourself in a relationship situation. I was interesting. Last week, I got a little note from someone who's here this morning and just talking about how God is beginning to heal their marriage. And it thrilled my heart. I looked at that all week, just reminding God, you're at work. God, you're at work. God takes setbacks and causes it to be setups for His glory. God is going to bring glory to Himself. Notice 1 Corinthians. I don't know what you're going through this morning, but do you trust God with the faith of Rahab? You want to know why Boaz did what he did? Because he knew where he came from. He knew faith-controlled choices. And so when Ruth was gleaning in the field, he didn't look at her as leftovers. He saw her as potential redemption. 1 Corinthians chapter 1 says it well. It gives us the answer when it talks about the gospel. Verse 26. 1 Corinthians 1:26. For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not. Stop right there. If you just go through, I went throughout my scripture here in chapter 1. I circled all the chose and calling. Called, chose. Who did this? God does it. God does it. God does it. God does it. Why? God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are. And then in the Greek, there's something called a hina clause here. This is a result clause. Why? Why? That's the answer. That's the question. Why did God do that? Why did God choose Rahab? Why did God choose Ruth? Why does God allow you and I to be a part of his plan? What is God doing? Why? Here's the answer. Verse 29. So that no human being might boast in the presence of God. No one's getting up there saying, I was pretty good, wasn't I, God? God, remember that situation that you put me through? And I responded perfectly in that. I mean, I was just like, ooh, look at, and man, people should have listened to me because I was right. No, it says no, that we would not boast in ourselves. There would be no boasting in the presence of God. There's going to be no one saying, look how great we've been. No, it says, and because of him, underline that, and because of who? Of him. You are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom, righteousness, sanctification, and, I love that word, the book of Ruth, redemption. So that as it is written, let the one who boast in the Lord. Why does God allow these things to happen? It's not for the seen, the transient, and the material. It is for the unseen. It is for the things that we just can't, intangible things, the immaterial things that God is doing behind the scenes. And the question of the book of Ruth, the question of the New Testament, the question is, do we trust God for salvation? And do we trust him in our lives every single day to be working what looks shameful and weak to be something for his glory? That we boast in him. You're going through a situation right now, maybe God's taking you, so you boast on him. Say, man, only God could get me through that. By the way, isn't that what's going to happen anyway? We're going to get to the end. We sang about this morning. We're going to get to the end, and we're going to look back, and we're going to say, wow, God, I cannot believe you did that. Yesterday morning, I looked back, and I remembered, how did I get here? I'm standing in the basement that I would have never have planned, playing a game, and I'm thinking, how did I even get here? I see God's hand the entire way. That's the story of Ruth. Let's stand together as we pray this morning.